Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's joining in, and welcome you all to the fourth webinar of the series of the World Bioenergy Association. This webinar, we're going to look at sustainable aviation fuels. What would it take for SAF to take off? My name is Bharadwaj Kumamuru. I'm the Executive Director for the World Bioenergy Association. And I've been part of the WBA for about 10 years now, managing the day-to-day operations of the organization. And I'll be the moderator to help you go through this session. The World Bioenergy Association, very briefly, we are a member-based organization, and our mission is to promote the sustainable development of all bioenergy technologies and solutions. We were established in 2008, and our activities include number one, knowledge and data. So we publish our statistics report, we publish fact sheets. In fact, we are this year we'll be coming up with a fact sheet on SAF and biogas. Secondly, networking opportunities where we organize webinars like this, but also roundtable discussions and study trips. And the next General Assembly, in fact, will be next month in Uganda. And finally, thirdly, most importantly, advocacy forms a very important part of our work through our observer status with the UNFCCC, IRENA, and other intergovernmental organizations, where we promote and push for bioenergy technologies and solutions as an option. Coming to the point of the webinar, the topic of the webinar today, we are going to look at SAF. And as most of you may know, very briefly, the aviation sector accounts for about 2 to 3% of the global emissions, and it's expected to grow even further. A few days back, I came across a very interesting statistics, which said that almost more than 80 to 85% of the global population has actually never flew. So it means not just those who are regular frequent flyers, but there will be a lot of first-time flyers as airlines become more affordable. So the end, as with any other sector, decarbonization is a very key priority, not just for the private sector, but also governments around the world. And there are various options when you look at the aviation sector: more efficient flights, you've got electrification for airports and so on. But at the end of the day, what we see is the biggest opportunity are sustainable aviation fuels. We specifically at the Bioenergy Association look at biofuels as one of the best options for decarbonizing the aviation sector. And there's been a lot of promising developments. There's a lot of first flights which are flowing exclusively on SAF. There's a lot of investments happening. There's a lot of new mandates which are coming up, which we will see in some of the presentations later on. And there's a lot of new partnerships and consolidation happening to develop and deploy biofuel options in the aviation sector. But the key problem is it's not at scale and pace that we need if we had to meet some of the targets in the aviation sector. So what we did is we put together an excellent group of speakers, experts who've been working in this industry for many years, and they're going to talk about what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, and what's needed in terms of technical, regulatory, political, finance mechanisms that's needed to deploy bioenergy solution or SAF solutions at scale and pace. Coming to the topic of this, coming to the sort of the flow of the webinar, we after my introduction, we'll have each speaker come up and share his presentation for 10 to 15 minutes or so. We'll try to have a couple of questions after each presentation. So for those who are joining us in the audience, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat function at the bottom, and we'll try to address. If there's any pertinent questions, we'll try to address right after each presentation. If not, what we'll do is at the end, after all the presentations, we will have roundtable discussions where we'll get some input from the speakers. A couple of other points: all the presentations and the recording of this webinar will be posted on the WBA homepage in a few days' time. And with that, I'll stop talking and I'll invite something that I haven't mentioned is that we're very pleased to have ASAFA, the Asian SAF Producers Association, as one of our partners in this webinar. So we're very thankful. They joined us as a member last year, and we're very thankful for this cooperation. So I now give the floor to Gabriel Ho from ASAFA to share a few slides on the association and the work that they're doing. Gabriel, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the warm introduction to all things SAF. I'm really excited to be here. We're a new nonprofit association. Just like to share a few, I guess, progress updates since we've launched last year. We'll jump right in so to keep the time for the speakers themselves. And really, we are probably the first non-profit to be doing this here out of Singapore. We really focus on the Asia region where there is a good high growth, lots of people want to travel, lots of more planes coming online. Yet, I guess we see a mismatch between the pace of decarbonization, the policies that are needed, the incentives, and so on, that are needed to really drive the whole SAF ecosystem. And being an independent organization ourselves, we actually have 5 core pillars that we listed here. It's always the first principle is about aviation decarbonizing, and SAF will be the main driver. We believe that will take us in the next 10, 20, 30 years to really make this happen. We also believe there's a need to really connect the markets and policymakers in terms of harmonizing so-called regulatory standards, creating incentives, frameworks, and that's really core pillar number 2. Core pillar number 3, we'll probably touch on this today, but we realize a lot of it's going to come from biofuels. SAF needs tremendous scales of feedstocks. They are not quite readily available as we speak. They are locked into maybe remote areas, remote locations, how to unlock all this to create a really diverse and sustainable supply chain. And with point number 4, again, it's a really wide audience here, but there are always, I guess, new things happening in the space, be it technology, be it certification, be it compliance. There's a need to really create this expertise, right, in the home countries that we operate in, particularly here in Asia. And we really hope to increase capacity building through webinars like these. Last but not least, about investments. Typically, the whole SAF ecosystem needs more capital injection, more new technologies to come into fruition, more world-scale plants to come, and all this can only come with proper financing. And we do have to be grateful to our members like LanzaJet. We really have come a long way since last year. We have now 24 international members and partners. As you can see, some well-known names, obviously, but some are also up and coming startups that play a big role in the whole ecosystem, like UCO collectors, palm producers, that sometimes, let's say, just learning about the whole SAF ecosystem and really will play a bigger role in years to come. And with that, we kind of also work with a lot of international organizations. Some, again, familiar names here, ICAO, IATA, for example, EASA, but there are also many emerging so-called connectors, right? We have ASEAN Center of Energy, we have transport forums, we have other biofuels associations, obviously World Bioenergy Association. So I think what we're seeing is reimagining the whole ecosystem to really, connect from feedstocks to producers, to new technologies, to regulators, and finally end users, right? All has to come together to make this all happen. For us, we have clear targets to really unite the whole ecosystem, which is listed here. And you can see again, even 24 so-called members and partners is merely, just the tip of the iceberg, right? We need just more organizations and companies to come together to make this whole ecosystem come alive in Asia Pacific. And ourselves, I'm leading really as the CSO and founder, but we really have a team here that comes from all parts of the ecosystem. We have Fabrice, who is ex-Airbus. We have Dr. Nick Maposo, who's a renowned SAF expert, works on the ASTM approvals. We have Kun Shan, who leads with carbon markets and strategy. So this is the kind of, let's say, mix that we believe to be important to drive an organization like ASAFA. And with that, we again want to highlight our activities like this. We're really happy to be doing this joint webinar with WBA. We also hold our own monthly webinars and really show you a few photos from the, let's say, events we've been doing across Asia. We also kicked off our publications. We'll be publishing more insights and about SAF in Asia. Also, we'll be launching our working groups that really focus on key topics like, say, LCA harmonization that really needed to unlock the feedstocks that we have in Asia. Pictures tell 1,000 words, really. So again, this is some snapshots of the kind of, let's say, relationships that we have across Asia. And we also, just came back really literally 2 months of events here in Singapore. We had something with Enterprise, Singapore here in with 100 people at the event. And we also had 2 back-to-back innovation and policy summits in Thailand, in Bangkok, and Tokyo in Japan, where we really had, let's say, across the whole ecosystem, right, to kind of enable, especially policymakers, to understand that SAF is not a domestic play. In fact, you should reimagine it to be a, export play, a regional hub, right? And the whole of Asia needs to work together to make this happen. Again, we have the webinars, and you see Renee as well on one of those. We're really quite active to really encourage capacity building, and publications are free to download as well from our website. And I think just to end it all, our guiding North Star is really the 5 targets we set ourselves, but you can see them on the screen. We really imagine Asia to be not only a producer of SAF, but to be, again, growing the whole ecosystem, to be, let's say, supporting other regions as well. There's so much biomass that we can unlock. So really put in some modest targets to encourage, policymakers and industry to think that we as Asia can achieve a, let's say, 5% average usage of SAF across the region. We believe, let's say, more than 8 million tons of SAF can be produced by 2030. We also believe all technology pathways are important, and we stress that we are really technology agnostic. And with points number 4 and 5 is really working towards a more, let's say, the expertise that we need in this region, and let's say a sister clearinghouse to support ASTM approvals will be needed in the long run. We also believe that, again, we might talk about this today, things like book and claim systems, accounting of credits, et cetera. How do we harmonize all the systems across Asia? And without further ado, I think I'll just hand it back to the floor, and really happy to take questions later on. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Gabriel, for the introduction. We're very pleased that you've been joined us as a member and also helping put together this webinar, and soon to be have a fact sheet on SAF as well. We'll come back to some questions at the end when we have the panel discussion. But glad you're part of the conversation here. Before I give the floor to the next speaker, I see there's some conversation happening in the chat. So for anyone, again, as a reminder, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat function. And maybe as an icebreaker, you can post where you're coming from and which affiliation you are as a start. But without any further ado, I give the floor to our first speaker, Daniel Lee, who's the Program Public and Regulatory Affairs Manager at Neste. And we'll have an introduction about the policy and regulatory developments for SAF growth in Asia Pacific. Daniel, thanks for joining, and please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Bharaj. First, I'd like to thank the World Bioenergy Association and ASAFA for organizing this webinar on what it would take for SAF to take off, and for the opportunity to speak today on how we at Neste see the development of the policy and regulatory landscape for SAF in the Asia Pacific region as being a critical part of the answer to that question. First, a brief introduction to Neste. As a company, we have our origins in fossil oil and gas refining and marketing. We were founded in 1948 to secure Finland's national oil supply. Since then, we have been through several rounds of transformation that have seen us go from being a regional European refiner to becoming a global leader in renewable and circular solutions today. Simply put, we are in the business of creating solutions for mitigating climate change and accelerating the shift to a circular economy. As the world's leading producer of SAF and renewable diesel, we enable our customers to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by refining waste, residues, and other renewable raw materials into high-quality renewable fuels at our refineries located on 3 continents. Our annual production capacity of these fuels will reach 6.8 million tons in 2027, and we are not staying put, but continuing the transformation journey by developing new markets and raw materials, including processes for new types of lower quality waste and residues such as brown grease and acid oils, novel vegetable oils based on regenerative agricultural concepts, and lignocellulose from agricultural and forestry waste. Has been mentioned by our host, aviation accounts for 2 to 3% of global carbon emissions, and this will grow to more than 20% by 2050 if action is not taken. What's not so often mentioned is that the climate impact of non-CO2 emissions, particulate matter and controlled cirrus, whose contribution to global warming is estimated to be at least double that of the CO2 emissions alone. With no zero emission alternatives currently viable for long-haul flights, SAF has been widely recognized as a key solution for achieving the aviation sector's goal of net zero emissions by 2050. IATA estimates that SAF, which can reduce GHG emissions by up to 80% over the life cycle compared to fossil jet fuel, needs to contribute about 65% of the emissions in the aviation sector that's required to meet this goal. Globally, nearly 500,000 flights have taken to the skies using SAF, which accounts for about 0.2% of total global jet fuel consumption. But in order to reach that 65% figure, production needs to go from 100 million liters today to at least 450 billion liters by 2050. Neste has been helping the aviation sector to meet these targets by producing and delivering Neste My SAF since 2011, shortly after the HEFA SAF pathway was approved by the ASTM. Today, we are the world's leading producer of SAF at commercial scale, with production capacity of 1 million tons annually from our Singapore refinery. In April, we began producing SAF at our refinery in Rotterdam, which has been modified to produce an additional 500,000 tons of SAF per year. As a result, our global SAF production capacity has increased to 1.5 million tons this year and will further increase to 2.2 million tons in 2027 once the ongoing expansion of our Rotterdam refinery is complete. This production capacity enables us to significantly contribute to the implementation of the Refuel EU aviation regulation and similar SAF mandates, with the 1.5 million tons being more than enough to meet the 2% SAF target in 2025 under Refuel EU. Besides increasing our production capability at existing refineries, we are also expanding our global supply capabilities. Neste SAF is already available at over 25 key airports with over 1 million passengers a year across the globe, including San Francisco, Amsterdam, Schiphol, more recently from Los Angeles, from Changi Airport, from Ontario and Vancouver International, and from Narita and Haneda through our distribution partner in Japan, Itochu. While the aviation industry already recognizes that SAF is a key lever to get to net zero emissions by 2050, at the national level, it is equally important that there is a regulatory and legislative environment supporting the development and adoption of SAF. Collectively, governments around the world are realizing that the potential for SAF to meet their net zero ambitions and are increasingly converting this realization into supporting policy frameworks based on mandates, incentives, or a combination of both, which are critical to enable the ramp-up of SAF adoption. With supporting policies in place and voluntary demand growing, we expect global SAF demand to grow from 2 million tons this year to at least 7 million tons per annum by 2030, and possibly as high to 10 to 15 million, depending on some estimates. Due to incentives at the state and federal levels in the US and Canada, and also from SAF mandates in Europe and increasingly from the Asia Pacific region. To date, we can see that SAF deployment has been anchored by strong regulatory drivers in the EU and UK, along with market incentives in North America. Now, however, other regions such as Latin America, the Middle East, and Asia Pacific are following suit with policies that could reshape the global SAF landscape. I think these countries are laying the groundwork for scaled SAF deployment by implementing progressive blending mandates and targets on a scale that could soon rival or even exceed transatlantic demand. These are important because having clear short and long-term target indications can help create a steady market demand and encourage fuel producers to invest in scaling up SAF production capacity, as this is highly capital intensive. Our experience and observation indicates that countries that have been first movers in adopting policies that create a market for advanced cleaner fuels have also attracted the most investments. This is a question that we get quite often, and what is the correlation between increase in production investments and also in terms of SAF adoption? And I think that there's a very clear link between these kind of supporting policies and targets that create that market demand and which in turn lends that to the demand certainty. Turning to the Asia Pacific, we can see that supporting policies and long-term targets have generally been behind Europe and North America, and most demand is currently driven by voluntary adoption in the absence of compulsory demand. That being said, several countries in the region have committed to SAF mandates with ambitions aligned to that of Europe and North America, in line with their national capabilities. Singapore, for example, has taken the step of becoming the first country in the region to introduce a 1% SAF target in 2026, which will increase to 3 to 5% in 2030. It's been followed by Japan, which announced a mandate requiring SAF to comprise 10% of the fuel supplied to departing flights by 2030, with a minimum 50% lifecycle GHG reduction. Following Singapore and Japan's lead, other countries in Asia Pacific, including India, Indonesia, South Korea, and Malaysia, have announced SAF targets that will come into effect from 2027 onwards. South Korea's blending program will commence from 2027 at the 1% level. And the government is setting medium to long-term targets that will extend all the way to 2035. Indonesia has unveiled its own SAF roadmap last year at the Bali Air Show. And they will require international flights from Jakarta and from Bali to use 1% SAF by 2027, rising to 2.5% by 2030 and 50% by 2060. Malaysia also will aim to start at 1% in 2027 and to rise gradually to 47% by the middle of the century. I think a key driver for SAF adoption has also been recognition in the APAC region that is uniquely placed to benefit from SAF production and export due to the abundance of renewable feedstock in this region and the fact that nearly 40% of global aviation is located here in Asia Pacific. So SAF production capacity based on just the announced investments is set to almost triple to 2024 from 1.2 million tons to around 3.5 million tons by the end of this year. Many countries in the region have also begun to provide funding in the form of production incentives or research grants to attract investment in SAF manufacturing and technological pathways. For example, the Japanese government aims to raise a total of 1 trillion yen in public and private sector investment to boost domestic SAF manufacturing over the next 10 years. And they are providing a production tax credit of 30 yen per liter of SAF produced and consumed in Japan. Australia has announced that it would deliver $250 million under the Future Made in Australia Innovation Fund to fast-track the establishment of a low-carbon liquid fuels industry. And the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, ARENA, has been providing funding for several companies to embark on feasibility studies related to SAF and feedstock production. That being said, with a typical 3 to 5 year time lag from planning to production, investment announcements taking place as late as 2027, resulting in production in 2030, it may not be clear that these announcements will ever reach final investment decisions. 3 years can be a long time for a lot to happen. So far, we've seen 43 SAF production facilities of all types of pathways planned in Asia Pacific, but as of 2024, only 5 are operational, and this will increase by 7 more over the next 2 years. Project financing, I think, has been mentioned, is important for capital investment for such large-scale products because investors do want to see a return, and demand certainty is required for these large-scale investments to take place. I think an example has been Neste's own investment in Singapore, which was 1.65 billion euros into the refinery expansion in Singapore. Policy support in the form of mandates and incentives on both the supply and demand side can help create that certainty and drive investment. Without these enabling policies, SAF demand from airlines and other aviation stakeholders is still going to remain limited. We have seen an example of this where low domestic consumption and a lack of policy clarity have led to delays of some SAF projects in China. So just in conclusion, aviation and the global connectivity it still brings irreplaceable benefits to business and society. It is clear that you need to continue making progress in mitigating climate change and addressing the impact of aviation on the climate. It takes time to build SAF capacity in supply chains, and the goals for 2050 or even 2030 are not achievable unless started now. And this requires an enormous effort and close cooperation across the whole aviation ecosystem. And while it is clear, of course, that not all countries or even regions can progress at the same pace, we need to have increasing global and regional alignment on emissions reduction due to the international nature of aviation, and accordingly of SAF use. And so we need to bring more companies and more countries on board the SAF journey, as well as cooperation across the value chain. And I think this is one of the reasons why Neste is continuing to work with partners and stakeholders across the entire SAF ecosystem to increase availability both globally and in the Asia Pacific region. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. I mean, that sets the scene quite well. Thanks for sharing the journey for Neste in terms of, definitely it's a forerunner in the SAF journey. And thanks for sharing developments on the capacity increase, but also developing mandates around the world. I think there's a lot of useful information there. And we'll come back to a lot of that later on. But two quick questions, and there was a little bit of repetition as well on that. One on feedstock and one on markets. So first, in terms of feedstock, what sort of feedstocks are you currently see potential for SAF and also for future growth? Where do you see most of the feedstock coming from? I think it's a very difficult question to answer, but very important question when we're considering the scale up. And secondly, in terms of markets, you talked a bit about the production benefits from in Japan, and also support from in Australia and other regions as well. But where do you see in terms of production of SAF in the region? Which markets do you see are more promising in terms of the incentives that they are developing for setting up SAF facilities? Where do you see a little bit more promise? Maybe if you can expand a bit on that as well.
Okay, so to answer the question of the first question, I think currently for at least for the pathway that Neste uses for commercial production, which is the hydrotreated esters and fatty acids pathway, currently we actually rely primarily on animal and vegetable waste and residues. Some of it can be used cooking oil, animal fat, various agricultural byproducts from the plantation industry. I think the issue for a lot of this is that the supply is increasingly limited because they have many other applications, and the fact that the increasing SAF production will place, I think, a lot more demand on the existing pool of sustainably sourced feedstocks. And so I think we're always actually looking at new kind of developing raw materials that we have actually I think I've mentioned. Few would be novel vegetable oils, which are crops grown on marginal degraded land, which can't be used for growing crops for human or animal consumption. I think that one we see as the most promising in the immediate term. But I think accessing much broader pools of feedstock will also take I think technological advancements. And for example, I would say that we have recently announced a collaboration on lignocellulose, which comes from forestry residues and waste. But I think there can also be improvements, not just in the technological side, but also in regulations and also in collection infrastructure in many countries. I think many countries, for example, used cooking oil isn't collected at all, but actually taken out of the food stream and actually treated as waste. And not many may actually realize that there is actually some value to this. They could commoditize it and they could actually trade it internationally. So I think those are quite large pools of potential pools of future feedstock that perhaps policymakers could actually consider in the future. On the question of where we see as the most, I think, promising in terms of the production, I think, and in terms of production and demand, I think, like I said, our experience has indicated that generally we see a lot of investments actually taking place in markets where there has been some level of mandated demand. And I think one example I think that I brought up was actually Japan in terms of its both the production incentives, but also in terms of the very strong signal the Japanese government made by implementing a 10% SAF target in 2030. Actually, that led to investments by 3 Japanese companies, Cosmo, Ineos, and Idemitsu, to actually set up SAF production facilities in Japan. South Korea's SAF expansion strategy also is making this kind of impact as well. I think we've seen a lot of response from Korean refiners as well. In fact, 4 of them actually joined together in a consortium to actually set up SAF production. Also, aside from what they are doing independently at their own refineries. So I think yes, they very much go hand in hand. I think production and supply side incentives go very much in hand with the demand certainty, the guarantee of demand certainty that's created by the implementation of SAF targets, because there has to be the investors actually have to know that there will be a market for the products that they are going to be.
Is the only route that you're working on, no other routes, right? At Neste?
Currently, yes, it is the route that we are using.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Daniel. There's a lot of other questions that will come on standards and certifications, but we'll take that up at the end of the panel discussion. Thanks for the presentation, Daniel. And now we move on to the next speaker, Renee Wooten. I hope I pronounced it right. If not, I'm sorry. She's the director for new market development from LanzaJet, which is again one of the world leaders in SAF technology. So I'm very much looking forward to the journey of LanzaJet and what's happening on SAF. So Renee, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Just confirming everyone can see my slides.
Yes, we can see that.
Oops. All right. Good morning and afternoon to everyone, depending on where you're calling in from today. Thank you for joining us at the World Bioenergy Association in collaboration with ASAFA. I'm calling in today from Darwin, Australia. And my name is Renee Wooten-Tomlin. I'm the Director of New Market Development at LanzaJet. I'm an aerospace engineer and pilot by trade, and have spent the entirety of my career working in the aviation sector across airports, airlines, defence, and now fuel. I'm here today to accelerate the adoption of sustainable aviation fuel and to respond to the urgent call and need to decarbonise this hard-to-abate sector, and ensure we're collaborating in virtual rooms like this one today to be able to unlock value for one another. So I do encourage you, if you have any questions after I present, please ask. And if I can't get to them today, I'll absolutely make sure you receive the support and answers you're looking for. Now, as the SAF industry enters a phase of rapid international growth, LanzaJet is in a leading position to scale and build SAF that is produced from ethanol and compatible with existing aircraft and infrastructure. While other companies are sharing well-intentioned goals and visions, LanzaJet is moving its technology into action with actual production to support energy security and solve aviation's biggest SAF challenge, which is the lagging supply to meet demand from the world's airlines and governments. Our aim is to decarbonize the aviation industry so that family, friends, colleagues, and commerce can stay connected. And it's no small feat, but we do believe we have the right people asking the right questions, the right intentions to make it happen. And so we will. Our path to reaching our 2050 ambitions is complex. So the industry has aligned on one of the most important actions needed to decarbonize, and it's SAF that stands out, with 65% of the goals carbon abatement strategy being tied to the production and use of SAF. But of course, like any good estimate, it depends on accelerated technological breakthroughs, rapid scale-up of SAF production, and stronger policy support that could push the impact of SAF even further. Our path to reaching our 2050 ambitions is complex. So the industry has aligned, as I mentioned. And so we can see what those 4 possible pathways are to decarbonising SAF, with SAF sitting at that 65% goal to abate that carbon. A thriving SAF industry will emerge from concerted effort across several key areas. So we've heard about some of those already today. Technology being the first, so continued research and innovation are essential to develop cost-effective, scalable production methods and improve fuel performance. Policy, government incentives, support regulations, and clear targets will drive industry adoption and create a stable market environment. Users, airlines and other industrial users committing to sustainable practices will create consistent demand, pushing the industry forward. Funding. Both public and private investments are crucial to support research, infrastructure development, and large-scale production. And then finally, consumers. An increasingly informed and environmentally conscious public will drive market demand, encouraging further industry growth. So together, these unifying efforts form a robust ecosystem that will fuel the growth of the SAF industry and help achieve global decarbonisation goals. Now, they say your past is the best indicator for your future, so I draw on our history of leadership at LanzaJet. We're backed by 14 years of technology development that's now being deployed at commercial scale. We're first to market to receive ASTM approval using our LanzaJet alcohol-to-jet data, followed by commercial flights. The world's first ethanol to SAF plant, fully funded, committed offtake in place for the next 10 years. We're expected to produce 1 billion plus gallons per year of projects, which are currently established around the world. Our SAF provides a significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, 95% reduction in particulates, and an increase in energy density. And we're doing it with a world-class team, building for growth and scalability with a world-class team of leaders, engineers, and innovators. But before I dive deeper into our technology and plans for a sustainable future, I'd like to take a moment to recognise our world-class funders and supporters. We all know building, sustaining, and scaling a new industry requires true partnership at all levels, and LanzaJet wouldn't be this far along without the contributions of 13 major equity holders who represent the breadth of the SAF value chain, including airlines, oil majors, technology players, aerospace manufacturers, and financiers. In 2020, LanzaJet was founded as a new company by LanzaTech, Suncor, and Mitsui, with additional investment from the US Department of Energy and All Nippon Airways. In 2021, Shell and British Airways joined as investors, and in 2022, LanzaJet received $100 million in combined funding from Microsoft's Innovation Fund and the Bill Gates Breakthrough Energy, and secured offtake agreements from ANA and British Airways. In 2024, we've announced investments from leaders across the SAF value chain, including Southwest Airlines, Microsoft, Group ADP, MUFG, and now Airbus. And we're working with projects spanning 25 countries and 5 continents. LanzaJet is working to scale that ethanol to jet globally, and partnering with key players is really transformational and critical to our mission. So where are we and where did we begin, I hear you ask? Following 10 years of scale-up work in 2020, LanzaJet spun out of LanzaTech, a carbon recycling leader, to solely focus on the development of SAF. LanzaJet's alcohol-to-jet technology dates back to 2010, with initial research and proof of concept beginning by LanzaTech and the Department of Energy's Pacific Northwest National Lab. Using LanzaTech's data from our pilot plant, we achieved ASTM certification for ethanol-based SAF as a pathway in 2018. We then ran our first transatlantic and trans-Pacific flights fueled by ethanol and partnered with Virgin Atlantic, Boeing, and ANA to execute those. Since 2023, we've begun to announce new projects across the world, including India, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, UK, and Europe. And in 2024, we're the first company in the world to construct a commercial scale demonstration alcohol-to-jet SAF facility, LanzaJet's Freedom Pine Fuels. LanzaJet's ethanol to SAF technology makes it the most adaptable pathway on the market thanks to the flexibility of feedstocks it can use. The process can use ethanol based on being able to accept the widest variety of feedstock sources. So the integration of all 4 units, dehydration, oligomerization, hydrogenation, and fractionation also represent a first-of-a-kind deployment at commercial scale. LanzaJet's technology is highly selective for SAF production, yet it's also efficient and flexible, allowing for optimization towards renewable diesel output without any changes in equipment, catalyst, or capital. This gives operators maximum optionality to adjust based on evolving market needs. For example, our technology can shift from a 90% SAF and 10% renewable diesel split all the way to a 75% renewable diesel and 25% SAF split. And while SAF is LanzaJet's primary focus, the technology also produces renewable diesel, which is another route to move away from conventional fuels for road transport, the heavy industry, maritime, and backup energy systems. Currently, the ethanol to SAF pathway is synonymous with sugar and carbohydrate feedstocks such as waste and byproducts associated with the likes of corn, sugarcane, and sorghum production. These feedstocks will continue to play a critical role in the production. However, we have a product on the market that's compatible with a broad range of non-derived waste, such as municipal solid waste, agricultural residues, and woody waste. And wait, it gets better. We can also aggregate, synthesize, and ferment industrial off-gases or direct air capture carbon into SAF. Circulair is our joint solution that delivers the most diverse feedstock platform of any available SAF pathway through our partnership with LanzaTech. So LanzaTech is the front end of our technology, which you can see on the left-hand side here. LanzaTech aggregates and repurposes waste carbon streams into ethanol through biotechnology. And then on the right-hand side, LanzaJet uses the alcohol-to-jet technology and transforms that ethanol into SAF. As I mentioned, some of the eligible feedstocks include agricultural waste, woody waste and residues, restorative energy, immediate crops, municipal solid waste, waste off-gases, and then renewable power and CO2 via direct air capture. Circulair and alcohol-to-jet can be used to deliver on our 2050 targets for every feedstock except for HEFA. So technologies like HEFA, the only other commercially viable option for SAF, are reaching production capacity limits. So there is only so much cooking oil in the world, which is one of the primary feedstocks for HEFA, and it's also represented in the green bar down the bottom of that graph. Alternatively, alcohol-to-jet is forecast to be a significant portion of the growth market in SAF in the coming decades, and with the added flexibility of our technology offering through Circulair, we have the capacity to scale up and provide a solution across alcohol-to-jet, gasification, and power-to-liquids, your other three remaining SAF pathways in the graph here. LanzaJet's partnership with Technip Energies is essential for driving our Circulair and alcohol-to-jet projects forward. By combining LanzaJet's innovative waste carbon conversion technology with Technip Energies' world-class expertise in process engineering and project execution, we are accelerating the development and scalability of sustainable aviation fuel. So this collaboration not only enhances the efficiency and reliability of our projects, but also plays a crucial role in the production of SAF at our Freedom Pine Fuels facility in Georgia Soperton. So located in Georgia Soperton, FPF represents one of the most promising SAF production developments. It's a commercial scale demonstration plant. The facility will annually produce 10 million gallons of SAF and renewable diesel that meets global standards from low carbon and certified ethanol. Our Freedom Pine Fuels plant is mechanically complete and operational. As is typical for a commercial demonstration plant, we're learning a lot from Freedom Pines that no one else in the industry has because it's first of a kind. So the facility is fully funded with committed offtakes for all fuel produced over the next 10 years. And that facility has also locked in its feedstock supply for the duration of these above agreements. Here's a quick snapshot of the timeline to bring that operational plant online. So from December 2022 through to January 2024, which is when we held our opening ceremony. As I mentioned earlier, we have a really strong pipeline, and our products and services are shown with interest across the United States through to New Zealand, Europe, North America, and the Asia Pacific. That global interest is shown here, namely is driven through policy and mandates at this point in time. Very, very briefly, we do have a number of publicly announced projects. In Australia, we have two, which is our Jet Zero Australia and Wagner Sustainable Fuels. There's a little bit of information there. Capacity is 113 million litres per year for both of those, with the feedstock being different between the two. So on the left-hand side, we've got a sugarcane feedstock, and on our right-hand side, municipal solid waste with Wagner Fuels. In the United Kingdom, we have an ethanol to SAF technology using woody waste and agricultural residues to produce SAF Project Speedbird, a partnership with British Airways. And then in New Zealand, Project Paracow is being run with Air New Zealand to undertake a study for domestic SAF production. We also have a joint venture in India. LanzaJet is working with India's largest oil company, Indian Oil Corporation, to develop India's first ethanol-based SAF plant with local feedstocks. Cosmo Oil was mentioned earlier. So using LanzaJet's proprietary ethanol to SAF technology, Cosmo Oil intends to leverage the company's expertise in plant operations, fuel quality control and logistics with Mitsui's capabilities in ethanol procurement to develop the project. So LanzaJet has already announced projects that will lead to more than 300 million gallons of annual SAF production capacity and is on its way to producing 1 billion gallons of SAF by 2030 through its proprietary technology. In closing, we're excited to collaborate and scale our groundbreaking solutions as LanzaJet's uniquely positioned with cutting-edge technology that delivers up to a 95% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and minimizes contrail formation. We're backed by the world's first A-to-J plant and independently proven LanzaTech and LanzaJet solutions. Our bold mission to decarbonize aviation makes us the partner of choice for accelerating a cleaner, more sustainable future. As I mentioned before, if you have any questions or want to learn more about how we decarbonize aviation, please reach out. We're excited to partner with you. Happy to take questions.
Perfect. Thanks so much. I mean, we've heard about the HIFA route and now the alcohol to jet route. I mean, at the end of the day, when you talk of the aviation sector and the challenge of decarbonization, we need all sort of technologies and all pathways, and two of these most commercial pathways hold significant promise. So thanks for sharing the journey for LanzaJet. One very quick question. Firstly, you mentioned you were a pilot. Was that commercial pilot or was it?
I have a commercial pilot license.
Excellent. And when it's very rare to have someone sort of in the industry who's actually, flying planes. How do you see any difference in when you're, having conversations about the regular jet kerosene versus biofuels as a pilot? What's your perspective? Or is it because at the end of the day, the fuel molecules are probably still the same?
Yeah, I mean, so LanzaJet's alcohol to jet has a higher energy density. So I think if anything, there's excitement because we're seeing OEMs come online and partner with airlines to be able to look at upgrading engine technology to be able to transition from 50% SAF blends through to 100%. So I think if anything, there's a lot of excitement. I think there's still a huge amount of work to do in terms of consumer education and really seeing that be driven through behavior to really opt into offsetting emissions in your ticket pricing. So yeah, more work to be done.
Yeah, I have I've got a lot more questions, but two I thought I could ask. One on the feedstock again. And you've mentioned because at the end of the day, it's alcohol to jet route. But as you see, there's a lot of these regulations which come up because which specify where or what sort of feedstock can be qualified for the alcohol to jet route. Some in EU, for example, they prefer non-food crops or cellulosic biomass, whereas in other jurisdictions, these sugarcane ethanol or corn ethanol are far more favorable. When you have these kind of different regulations in terms of what sort of feedstock can be qualified to produce this alcohol to jet, is that challenging? How do you address that challenge in the work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the key things that we are really focused on is being able to model and understand the carbon emissions through the entire life cycle. And we do that through in-house modeling, but also by lobbying and working with governments around the world to be able to help them understand what the carbon intensity actually means, how we calculate it, and therefore the implications of certain regulations. A great example is in the UK at the moment, they obviously have a 2G requirement. And Jonathan will probably speak to this a little bit more, but certainly we have an ambition to try and tap into any 1G ethanol that's available on the market readily, that's not adding to the current supply that's available through the emergence of electric vehicles. So that's a great opportunity for us to work with governments to understand how can we not seek perfection in every region, but instead seek progress initially with the intention to progress to obviously much better carbon intensity values for our 2G, 3G ethanol sources.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, that's very critical, and we see that conversations happening as well. And we are trying to, as you pointed out, educate on looking at the life cycle emissions and carbon balance of the whole value chain for biofuel production. Second on, I think you had a very interesting map, but you were quick on that in terms of the global outlook or where the emerging markets for the alcohol to jet route. You had some where you saw which was more promising and some which are not so good. I think one of the key drivers, as you pointed out, would be the mandates, which countries have these well-established, strong mandates. But I guess, and maybe you could point out as well, is sort of well-established alcohol production facilities, countries such as Brazil and India, which have long been sort of good alcohol ethanol producers, but not into SAF as much. Does that come into calculations as well when you're looking at which markets are more promising apart from just the mandates? What other key factors do you look at which to sort of identify good markets for the technology?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a number, actually. We have an internal tool that we've developed to be able to assess our emergence into certain markets or how successful we will be. A lot of that is driven by many factors that we've already discussed today. So financier support, government support, ethanol refinery industry infrastructure is another one. Project developer capability. So who's the team that's coming to us and what experience do they have in this field? Because that will really then dictate their access to the right networks, the right value chains, and the right funding to be able to unlock projects as well. There's much more as well. We look at environmental impact assessments and obviously feedstock supply chains. So there's numerous.
Oh.
Again, if anyone has questions around that too, please feel free to reach out and we can provide a comprehensive overview of that.
Yeah, one quick final question, because I see one from Alan Sherrod, who's actually the editor for Bioenergy International, which is also one of the partners for this webinar in terms of promotion, the leading English publication for bioenergy. And his question's on whether it's ethanol the only feedstock, or do you use other alcohols, including such as methanol for SAF production?
Yeah, at the moment we're just looking at ethanol as the feedstock. So yeah, thanks for the question.
Thanks, Ned. Thanks again for your presentation, and we come back in the panel discussions. And finally, we move on to the last presentation, and that's Jonathan Wood, who's the Chief Commercial Officer for Nova Pangaea. We met very briefly virtually a few months back. Very interesting technology. I think Renee highlighted or touched upon the Speedbird project in the UK, which I think we will also briefly mention. But yeah, please, the floor is yours, Jonathan.
Thank you very much. I'm just pulling up the presentation, so just bear with me for around markets, feedstocks, policy. Bear with me for a second. Apologies, but there was a little bit of a time delay.
We see that in the presenters mode, so maybe the slideshow.
Yes, I'm just waiting for the drop-down menu to come to be able to put it in full screen. Maybe whilst we're waiting, I'll just introduce myself with a couple of words before getting into the topic in more detail. So I now am Chief Commercial Officer for Nova Pangaea Technologies, and we'll talk a bit more about who they are and how they play in the value chain. But prior to that, I have quite a lot of common ground with some of the other former presenters on this webinar. I led the setup of the SAF business for Neste for 5 years, predominantly in Europe, but also with some global responsibilities. So whereas now with Nova Pangaea, I'm playing, if you like, in the alcohol to jet pathway. Prior to that, I was very much integral to the setup of the HEFA pathway. Many of the customers that are now being supplied and using HEFA, I was involved in. And prior to that, actually, I was with BP, so very much in the larger oil major space, and led 10 years ago the investment into one or two startup SAF players, and the first supply through a commercial airport of SAF up in the Nordics, together with Neste. So I've been at this for a while, and we made tremendous progress, but we've got a hell of a pathway still to go, and that's why I think it's really important that we think about the feedstocks that will enable us to achieve that growth. So I'll cover, building on what's been said earlier, a little bit about the market context for aviation and SAF, and then get into a bit more of the specifics as to how the Nova Pangaea technology solution can help really scale up the utilization of biomass residues to produce ethanol, which we've heard from Renee, is a key input into the alcohol to jet pathway. And what's particularly noteworthy is that by using the Nova Pangaea technology, one can actually deliver a carbon negative end product. And as Renee rightly said, at the end of the day, policy, this is all about reducing net emissions versus the fossil fuel alternative. And so carbon intensity is actually critical. And then I'll talk a little bit more about how we're progressing, scaling up, and the UK Speedbird project that was referred to earlier, which is an end-to-end value chain comprising Nova Pangaea taking the biomass waste, converting it into ethanol for then the conversion by land to jet prior to utilization by IEG. So it's a great showcase that we can, quite frankly, lift and shift, hopefully, and apply in other regions of the world. Maybe one or two other opening comments. I think we're all well aligned as an industry, and if you look beyond the industry, society as a whole is well committed to the net zero by 2050. But the challenge is more about how do we achieve that sustainable, secure, and affordable end objective. And so supply is absolutely critical, feedstock and technology. On the demand side, yes, regulation is critical to drive demand, but we also need voluntary demand, as was mentioned by end consumers. And we're going to need huge investment dollars, trillions, to enable this just alone within the aviation sector. So policy is absolutely critical to enable the, if I can put it like this, bridging of the cost gap versus fossil jet fuel, which is, of course, not a directly comparable product because, of course, fossil fuel comes with the net emissions that renewables don't come with. But policy is a key enabler, both on the demand and the supply side. But we really need a portfolio of different technologies. We shouldn't try and bet on one, but really allow all to flourish. Partnership is absolutely key, and I think here on this webinar today, you've got a great example of it with Nova Pangaea and LanzaJet working together with IAG in the UK. And as has been evidenced already by other comments, partnership is going to be key to delivering these projects in other regions around the world. And we also need to be pragmatic. We need to move forward rather than always seeking the perfect. Let's move forward with the good and do, learn, do, and by so doing get to where we need to get to. I'm just throwing up here a chart which I would imagine most of you on the call are familiar with, but it visualizes what was discussed earlier around the roadmap to decarbonization of aviation and the critical role that sustainable aviation fuel will play. It doesn't really matter whether it's 50%, 60%, or 70%. It's a huge, significant portion of the overall decarbonization. since new propulsion technologies will take longer and probably won't be able to be applied for, in particular, the long-haul international and large-scale aviation. So with that in mind, and I should also hasten to add, this chart is about GHG emissions, roughly a billion tons of CO2, which we obviously need to bring down. So when we talk about volume and volume share, if we can unlock sustainable aviation fuels which have a superior or even negative carbon intensity, that will help move us along this roadmap of decarbonization, or should I better say defossilization. One other comment that was made as I continue to talk a little bit about the overall market position is feedstocks. All feedstocks must play a role, and Neste has clearly taken a leadership position by the use of waste oils and fats in scaling up its heifer-based production platform, and can also tap in, hopefully, to novel vegetable oils grown on degraded land. But we have huge resources of biomass, non-crop based biomass, that's already available, and is in some instances even burned to stubble to clear the land. So there's a real opportunity here in all regions of the world, not just in the UK and the EU, but in North and South America, and of course in the Asia Pacific region. Huge resources of agricultural and forestry waste, which, when converted to fuel, can actually deliver a very, very significant portion of the overall feedstock pool that we can tap into. Of course, there will, on top of this, be the need to develop the power to liquid, or ASAF pathway, by utilizing renewable power to produce green hydrogen. But even there, one needs a biogenic source of carbon. So once again, biomass can even play a role in the scale up of the power to liquid pathway. So this was just an attempt to visualize what it looks like globally. I haven't got it in this presentation, but the question was asked earlier about the regional split. And the great thing here is that, as I said earlier, agricultural residues, and to a degree forestry residues, are available in all regions of the world. It may be bagasse in South America or South Asia, rice husks, or corn stover in North America, for example. So having a technology which can use these different lignocellulosic second generation feedstocks is key. And that's where the Nova Pangaea technology comes in. We can utilize these different kinds of feedstocks, and following a pre-treatment, which has to be tailored according to whichever the feedstock is, we then put it through what's called a rapid steam-assisted pyrolysis process, which is basically heating it up to very high temperatures and by so doing, splitting out the sugars, which we then ferment into ethanol, and separating that from the biochar, this biocarbon biochar, somewhat like charcoal, but much finer material. So we have effectively, from the Nova Pangaea technology process, production process, two physical products: the sugars that can be made into ethanol and then ultimately into SAF, and also the biochar. But the biochar also is a form of CO2 sequestration. In actual fact, we capture over 3 tons of CO2 for every ton of biochar we produce. And so the overall production process can become carbon negative. In other words, it captures more CO2 than the physical products that are produced from the process. We have been running this process and fine-tuning it over recent years. We have a demonstration plant in the north of England, which has been running for some while. We're fine-tuning the equipment, and we're therefore, from next year, when we make our final investment decision on our first plant in the UK, we'll be then ready to scale it up. And here, just a quick visualization of what the biochar looks like. It's not a product that maybe many of us are familiar with, but it actually has multiple applications. First and foremost, it can be used to enhance as a soil enhancer by improving the retention of water and nutrients, and it remains for many years. The CO2 effectively is permanently sequestered, whilst at the same time improving the quality of soil and hence yields, and so there's a real side benefit here for farming productivity and the reduction in use of fertilizers. But it can also be used as in an application whereby it enhances water and air filtration, as a filler in cement for construction, so effectively a low carbon solution for the construction sector. And in high specification form, it can be used in high performance composite materials, even to the point of, for example, being used as an input into materials used in automobiles and aircraft. So it really has some high performance characteristics that strengthen materials when applied in small quantities. So a little bit of a sidetrack there, but biochar is a co-product alongside the ethanol that we use to make SAF. But the benefit then is that we can create a situation where we've got a carbon negative ethanol or SAF if we allocate that CO2 that we've sequestered to the ethanol. So fossil fuel typically has a carbon intensity of 89 grams of CO2 per megajoule of power. It depends, but most SAFs are in the range of 14 to 50 grams per megajoule, so 50, 60 to 70, 80% CO2 reduction versus the fossil jet fuel equivalent. Most regulations require now, certainly in the EU and UK, a 70% reduction versus the fossil jet fuel equivalent. When we reflect our latest calculations of the GHG emission reduction for the Speedbird project together with LanzaJet, this is effectively achieving a negative carbon intensity in our first of a kind plant with further room for improvement. So it's 2 to 3 times better, if I can put it like that, than SAFs currently on the market. So in effect, you can achieve 2 or 3 times the carbon emission reduction, CO2 emission reduction, or put it in a different way, you only need to buy half as much or a third as much to achieve the same. So it's effectively a higher value end product that we're producing. So that's a little bit about the Nova Pangaea technology and how it can play within the end-to-end value chain and the carbon intensity benefits that it can bring with this process. And then just finally, an update on the UK project, Speedbird, where we've got a nice circular solution here where Nova Pangaea will be taking the biomass, producing the ethanol to go into the LanzaJet facility for use by British Airways, and the biochar co-product goes back into the farming sector. So we have offtake agreements in place for all of the products, as well as feedstock supply agreements and sites selected. And I should add also the government Advanced Fuel Fund has been supporting this end-to-end value chain project, because the great thing about it is it will not only deliver a significant amount of fuel to meet the advanced SAF mandate as that scales up in the UK from 2% to 10% by 2030, but it's a technology which we can then deploy in other regions of the world with project partners. So, in summary, the Nova Pangaea technology is the front end of the alcohol to jet pathway. It's feedstock flexible and generates end products with a negative carbon intensity. And what's great is that we now have the end-to-end value chain project in UK, Project Speedbird, underway, both with Langit and ourselves, so ready to scale and work with partners to build similar end-to-end value chains in other regions of the world. And this is where I think, quite honestly, it's a great opportunity for the APAC region with the huge resources around agricultural and forestry residues, in particular, feedstock being a key driver to having a affordable and sustainable solution for SAF. Thank you, and back now to you, Bharat.
Perfect. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for sharing the development at Nova Pangaea. Very interesting. A couple of quick questions before we move to a little bit broader discussion. I think you touched upon the very interesting aspect of biocarbon and biochar and the possibilities for negative emissions. And it's quite clear in pretty much all bioenergy technologies, when you have biochar, it adds up to the emission savings along the entire life cycle. But one question on the monetization, have you already looked at the opportunities? Are there existing opportunities to monetize that commodity? What sort of the level of discussions on that?
Yeah, that's obviously a key part of this to make sure it all works from an economic point of view. It's commercial.
Jonathan, we can't hear you so well. There's a little bit of disturbance when you're speaking.
Might need a computer reset, Jonathan.
It was better when you were presenting.
I'm afraid. Is it okay if I carry on?
Yeah, we'll see, please.
Yeah, I'm afraid that maybe the computer just getting a little bit hot. But in short, yes, we can monetize the negative carbon intensity in the UK because the UK mandate is based on carbon intensity or greenhouse gas emission reduction. So, as I mentioned earlier, effectively, IAG only need to buy half as much in order to achieve their GHG-based mandate targets.
Yeah.
Outside of the UK, it rather depends on the market regulation as to whether we can get the value from the negative carbon intensity, or whether we separate out the biochar-based carbon dioxide removal and sell that as a separate carbon credit. And that is actually now being done. You may have heard of corporates like Microsoft buying carbon dioxide removal credits, which are based off biochar-related projects. So it really depends on the market and the regulation of the market as to how we monetize it.
Yeah, sorry, I think there's still some issue. Maybe we'll give a bit of time for your laptop to cool down before we come back to you. But thanks again, Jonathan, for the presentation. Maybe we could have a sort of a roundtable discussion. I've got a few questions to all panelists, and I'm actually invite all the panelists to also jump in. And if you have questions yourself, please go ahead and ask. First, in terms, and this was a question which came up in the chat as well. And at the end of the day, the most important point is feedstock for SAF. And we touched, I think Daniel touched upon that, and Renee as well. But just as a panel, your views, maybe Gabriel, you could also jump in first. In terms of what sort of feedstocks do you see the most promise for SAF deployment, considering that there are a lot of emerging markets, a lot of competing markets. We haven't, of course, we've looked only at aviation, but you've got the same molecule which could go into road transport, which could go into maritime with their own standards and regulations coming up. Where do you see, what sort of feedstock do you see the most promise for the SAF deployment as we go ahead? And secondly, most importantly, and we've seen that in some of these cases, is that when you start having these significant mandates and targets, there can be challenges in terms of certification of the supply chains. We've seen some issues happening in EU. Some views on how do you ensure the standards and certification and responsible sourcing of the feedstock for SAF production? What sort of measures are in place within the company, but also within the regions that you're operating in, to make sure that the feedstock is responsibly sourced? So what sort of feedstock and sourcing of the feedstock? Any comments, clarifications from the panelists? Who wants to go first? Jonathan, we could try, but I'm not sure about the audio. No, I think it's bad. Very bad. Sorry about that. But you could maybe type it in the chat, your response. Gabriel, maybe first.
Yeah, I think we get this question all the time, really. And the truth of the matter when we speak to industry or policymakers, as you rightly pointed out, feedstock security and sustainability go hand in hand, right? In a short, we think that all feedstocks are viable if used in a measured way, right? Measured way, again, needs to be, let's say, governed by, I would say, the word common sense. Real example, right? We know there's valuable feedstocks coming from waste cooking oil. But you know, and all of us know there's a finite amount of, waste cooking oil, and how much can be actually collected in an efficient manner. This should be really looked at, maybe from a bottom-up approach. I know a lot of associations around the region, they've been publishing numbers. Even just came back from Tokyo, they also made their own estimates of the realistic amount of used cooking oil that be collected as a function of the diet, the way the cities are structured in a cost-efficient way. They're trying to get more households to come in. And I think that as we grow, we get a more realistic assumption of a realistic picture of what's can be collected from used cooking oil. And I think the same approach could be again repeated for all kinds of feedstocks, right? Be it palm waste residues, be it second generation crops, be it even so-called low carbon first generation feedstocks. They all can be again studied from bottom up. Each country has their own resources. And even likewise, e-fuels, we haven't even talked about e-SAF today. There comes to a point that there's excess green energy or green hydrogen that could be deployed into, again, making either directly to the methanol, to jet pathway, perhaps. There's so many options, right? I think we just need to kind of really do that analysis, and then it could be led by a consortium of both industry and policymakers to come together, right? Because I think no one really has the answer right now, and I think that's the message really I'd like to portray. Maybe rest of the panelists, feel free to chime in. Yeah.
Just quickly as a follow-up, Gabriel. I mean, yeah, you've touched upon the different types of feedstocks, but and I think you mentioned in your initial presentation on that you're also working on certification, book and claim, and other ways to ensure that it's responsibly sourced. Is that the conversations that you see a lot happening in your as you set up this association, as you start getting in more? Is that one of the primary questions? Or what other, is it more on finance or in terms of technology?
I think clearly there's some stress points in the industry right now about, let's say, the authenticity, or is there some fraud being committed in the whole feedstock value chain? Like or not, for this industry is growing exponentially, right? You rightly pointed out, it's not just SAF. You already have a large demand coming from land transport. You will have emerging demand for marine that's really triggered partially by the recent IMO net zero framework, that proposals put out. There's consensus on that. So I think really two schools of thought, right? We can either, let's say, hope for existing systems to be able to catch up in terms of certification, in terms of sustainability criteria setting. There are international frameworks like CORSIA, for example. There are international bodies like ICC doing their part. But I think the other school of thought we believe is the regions themselves, authorities need to kind of also step up to really ensure that at least in the national boundaries that they do their part to really, I hate to use the word, but to ensure really like the standards are met right internationally. So I think it's coming together. as we see at the moment. And I think, be it in Southeast Asia, be it India, everywhere, right? I think authorities realize how important is it to really ensure that the whole value chain is as transparent, as open, and as let's say as robust as possible to support the growth of SAF or biofuels as we scale up, right, towards 2030, 35, 40. So it's really encouraging, really. That's what I'm seeing so far.
Thanks, Gabriel. Private sector perspective. First, Daniel and Rene, in your company and the work that you're doing, feedstock sourcing, what sort of certification schemes that you're working with, and are they enough, robust enough, or is there more work to be done? Maybe Daniel first.
Yeah, so for us, it actually depends on the market. I think there are very widely recognized and very robust international certification schemes. I think like the ISCC is an example. For us, it's very important. It's very important that we actually comply with the standards actually set under the EU's Renewable Energy Directive as well. So there's ISCC EU, ISCC CORSIA, and various other I think international standards that actually have been established for sustainability and certification. When it comes to, I think, ensuring that there is actually, I think, rigorous sustainability certification along the whole supply chain, having these international standards, I think, is also useful in the sense that it avoids the duplication of effort at the national level. I think the same time, I think there has to be, I think, some concession, I think, to in other countries where perhaps the state of or there are challenges actually due to the economic landscape and so on, where there have been actually certain issues with actually complying with some of the more imposing of the requirements actually set. I think one very prominent example, I think, is the requirements set under the EU's deforestation regulation that actually has a bit of implications actually here in Southeast Asia, because compliance is actually very difficult at a smaller scale, whereas if you're a large agricultural business, it's actually much easier to actually meet these compliance and verification requirements. But when you are actually a smallholder farmer, it is a very different story. And so I think where actually you can actually try to harmonize this is actually to have recognition, I think, of national standards. I think examples would be Malaysia, where they have Malaysia Sustainable Palm Oil Standard, and they are actually working with the EU and other international partners to actually have wider recognition for these standards. At the same time, I think what these international partners actually can do is actually work with these governments also to kind of actually ensure that these local national standards that have been developed domestically would actually be able to actually to fulfill the requirements in their own markets.
Thanks, Daniel. I mean, the harmonization, definitely something that comes up quite often when we talk of global markets for biofuels and other technologies. Rene, your view on feedstock sourcing and certifications.
Yeah, I mean, to echo the sentiment of both Daniel and Gabrielle, so very much following ISCC, CORSIA international standards for certification. Freedom Pine Fuels is also built off of this certification. And in terms of supply of feedstocks and looking at distribution networks and infrastructure, we're certainly working with regions to try and understand what those networks are and how we get access to them and partner with them. But again, every project for us is very specific, and we need to seek certification by project. And the certification goes all the way up the supply chain, so from farmers through to feedstock production.
Yeah, thanks for that. Jonathan, you want to give it a try?
Yeah.
No, sorry, it's difficult. I think it persists, but we got your answer in the chat, that it's compliant with Red and CORSIA and verified by independent verifiers. Maybe we could do that sort of combination. Is you could answer the questions in the chat for now. There's a ton of questions coming up in the last 5 minutes, but of course we are short of time. But I'll try to ask one other quick round question. and you can be brief on that. Is a topic on finance. I mean, that comes up quite often when you talk of scaling up SAF production. We touched a lot upon private sector investments happening. We touched, I think, in one of the slides I saw was $3 billion or $3 trillion that's needed by 2050. We see a lot of public money going in as well, whether it's in terms of studies. We see airlines offering SAF premiums to travelers to pay for the SAF. And voluntary carbon markets. I think Jonathan mentioned that as well. We see a lot of the interesting developments in the power sector for bioenergy. We see that for example, in ethanol production, where you have a carbon dioxide stream, and some of them are trying to monetize that. We see in clean cooking space as well, where you have voluntary carbon markets and carbon credits coming up and supporting the financing of the sector. But if in your experience, what do you see are maybe one or two very important instruments, financing instruments? It could be something like carbon pricing, like in Sweden. What sort of instruments you see are super important for developing and deploying SAF at scale? Would that be whether looking at the feedstock or the technologies, more public sector investments, or VCM? That's something that could support one or two financing instruments we feel are very critical for SAF to develop and deploy. Who wants to start? We do same again, maybe Gabriel first, and then Daniel and Rene and Jonathan puts it in the chat.
Okay. I think really for the audience who are really experienced as well, those in the biofuel sector, I think at the beginning, right, be it ethanol, biodiesel, across the world, we've seen really a helping hand from governments to really kickstart industry. And we mentioned it a couple of times already, but smallholders are very much involved in this whole process when it comes to biofuels. In SAF as well, it's the same. They need all the help they can get. Smaller companies are also involved in the ecosystem, particularly even here in Southeast Asia, even so-called the largest players, by no means they're that big. So the plants are smaller, the expertise is lower. So this public-private partnership, or it is really crucial to at this stage that really the whole jet fuel, or at least SAF production, is so small right now, right? We're talking about a handful of plants that actually, will come online in a couple of years, right? And needs all the help we can get from, again, governments. And it can be a combination I've seen in Japan. I think Daniel mentioned it could be subsidies at the capex level. Even when they produce SAF, there might be subsidies per liter of fuel. Everything, de-risks projects, and let's say off-takers will come in, long-term agreements, and the list goes on, right? But I think the biggest role that governments, they will be the ones playing big part in this.
Yeah. Thanks. Daniel?
Yeah, I think one of the initiatives that you can actually see is actually kind of like where we can actually find a way for where corporates or customers who are actually not directly involved in the aviation industry, they may also be seeking to actually kind of decarbonize their own operations, or let's say their own corporate travel, or if like I'm say a freight forwarder like DHL, I would want to actually decarbonize my operations as well. So we actually see initiatives. I think one of them that was launched recently by Gen Zero, which is a subsidiary of Temasek, was the World Economic Forum, was this Green Fuel Forward initiative, which is actually helping to scale the demand for SAF in the Asia Pacific region. It actually seeks to kind of actually unite airlines, logistic providers, and corporates to actually kind of have some, try to actually boost and offer a platform for actually SAF to actually, the environmental attributes of SAF to actually be purchased independently through various book and claim system or other various kind of environmental attributes decoupling from the SAF, and actually allow these customers on a smaller scale to actually kind of contribute actually to the demand for SAF in the region. Yeah.
Thanks, Daniel. Rene?
So for us, I think the two most important financial levers to unlocking that funding are policy-linked revenue certainty, which includes tax credits like the US SAF Blenders Credit, 45Z, regulatory mandates, which we've already talked about, and long-term offtake agreements with credit-worthy partners that guarantee premium pricing based on carbon intensity. And then the second one would be capital stack optimization, so which blends concessional finance, government-backed loans, strategic equity to reduce the cost of capital and de-risk early stage investments. So yeah, very similar to what Gabrielle and Daniel have mentioned.
Finance instruments tied to carbon intensity and stacking, capital stacking. I think that's something that we haven't touched much on, but definitely very relevant for the sector. Jonathan, I see you have headphones on. Maybe we could give it one quick try.
Yeah, is it better now?
Excellent. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I always look upon the financing as being driven by technical assurance. So once you've got a FID on the first site and you've gone through the FEED front-end engineering design process, the level of risk around technology delivery is low. Then you've got the delivery risk. So the ecosystem of partners, have you got a credible set of consortium that can both build and operate? And then you've got the commercial underpinning, and that's both offtake and feedstock supply agreements, but also the policy around rewarding the carbon intensity and underpinning the demand side, both from a volume but also from a price point of view. So we're seeing now not just volume mandates, but also mechanisms around helping to underpin the price if you haven't got that in your offtake agreement. Those are the key deliverables there to underpinning the financing of this standing up of this new sector.
Great. Thanks. I mean, there's a lot of valuable contributions. I promised all the panelists and the speakers that will be maximum 90 minutes. So we're just 1 minute over schedule. And if I can just, there's a ton of questions coming up in the last 5 minutes or so, unfortunately, but we'll try to get some of these questions over to some of the speakers afterwards, and we can respond directly to the people that have been asking questions. And before I conclude, to keep it sort of very light, very quickly, right now the global SAF share is about 0.3% or 0.5% of the total jet fuel demand. If you have to guess, or if you have to make a very educated guess, where do you think, with the current situation, where do you think it could go by 2030 and 2050? And just to put as a perspective, EU, I think, has a target of 6% 2030, 70% by 2050. That's just an estimate. But if you have to guess, from 0.3% right now, 0.5% right now, where do you think it could be by 2030 and 2050? And if you have to go from this 1%, 5% to 70%, what's one critical thing that's needed for the sector to grow? So keep it very brief. Gabriel, you want to start?
I think for 2030, we really wish it will reach the threshold or critical of 5%.
5%.
I think that'll be really excellent. That translates into, I think, roughly maybe 15 million tons of jet fuel. Depends how fast we grow, right? But latest passenger numbers, it's just soaring. Jet fuel demand on flights are just soaring, right? It's not might be reaching that target hopefully earlier, but 2050 is anyone's guess, really. I'll be honest, right? We talk to a lot of people, a lot of stakeholders, and I think that sense of urgency sometimes gets it's because people worry about how viable and there's maybe a bit of hesitation on the government. Some of the smaller governments may be a bit hesitant. So that's where we see that really urge that the audience really keeps sight of the end goal, right? It's a marathon. It's always hard, but the earlier we start, right, then the earlier we will finish and reach the goal that we really want to be towards net zero.
5% by 2030. I think that sounds reasonable, I guess. Daniel, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I have to echo Gabriel's sentiment here. While we actually all hope for the best and maybe let's say 5% in 2030, the sad truth is that a lot can actually happen between now and 2030, let alone 2050. So I think even as from what I said, we've actually initially anticipated a much higher SAF availability in 2030 of maybe, let's say, 10 to 15 million tons. But actually now I think, given what we've seen actually in terms of the kind of political appetite from governments around the world, something we've been actually having to revise it to a bit more modest. Again, a lot of the commitments will actually have to actually come from both the industry in terms of their own individual ambitions, and also from governments actually continuing to actually see if they can aim for a much higher ambition in terms of reaching the net zero targets. And in this case, I think at a time where a lot of there's a lot of countries are actually pulling back from their commitments, I think it's important that we actually see that the ones that actually are trying to actually aim for much higher ones and are actually committed to actually implementing the targets that they have already stated they will, actually these need to actually kind of be supported as best as we can.
Great. Renee, where we are at 2030, where do you think? And then what's one thing we go from, say, 5% to 50%?
But I think under current policy, aviation would be lucky to achieve 30% of emissions reductions by 2050. And at the moment, we're probably on track for 5 to 10% maximum by 2030. What I think are the key factors to unlock that and make it achievable is rapidly expanding production capacity, so investing in multiple commercial scale plants today, and seeing that technology through to production and operation. Enforcing and increasing mandates and incentives is going to be essential. We need to create stable price signals, offtake demand, and then also support low carbon intensity feedstock development and logistics. So there's still hope.
Still hope. Yeah, thanks for that. And as you pointed out, it takes 3 to 4 years to build a plan. And if you're talking about 2030, that's 5 years away. So we have to start yesterday, sort of, to build these facilities. Yeah, thanks for that. Jonathan, final word. We're 2030 and...
Yeah, I would say 2030, 5% is probably the highest level we're likely to achieve, which is the 15 to 20 million tons. I agree with the previous colleagues that 2050, it's hard to tell. It could be 30 to 40%, it could be higher. But what I think is key is the build up of the new production technologies and feedstock pools, because pinning everything on the hopes of e-fuels, I think at the cost levels that we're looking at, and given that green hydrogen will be required for so many different sectors, we need to unlock the vast biomass feedstock pool, and in particular the residues from that biomass pool, and so looking at policies that help encourage that, because that's not going to be half as costly to produce as the e-fuel growth that we're envisaging, especially in policies in Northwest Europe, well, in Europe, I should say, including the UK.
Thanks, Jonathan. I mean, yeah, we have slightly over scheduled, but I think this has been an excellent conversation. We've had a lot of excellent insights. Thank you all for sharing your experience and the work that you're doing. There's been a ton of questions from the audience, which shows there's a lot of interest. And just to conclude, all the presentations and the recording will be made available on our homepage in a couple of days' time. Yeah, first of all, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the panelists. Thank you all for joining in. Thank the audience who's been quite patient with listening and also sending a lot of questions. Thanks to the partners, especially Gabriel, ASAFA. I mean, we couldn't have done it without you and your input. So thanks a lot for the cooperation. And with that, I would like to come to the end of the webinar, and I wish you all a very happy day and SAF journeys ahead. So we'll probably come back in 5 years and see if we touched 5% or not. But otherwise, have a great rest of the day, all of you, and we'll come back and catch up later again sometime in the near future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.